He had always heard rumors about the woods behind Carpenter Road, but he never believed any of the whispered stories surrounding it. Locals claimed that people who entered the forest after sunset never returned. But he always assumed those warnings were nothing more than small-town legends. When he stepped past the broken fence, the air fell into an unnatural stillness. As he moved deeper into the tree line, the silence felt almost intentional. Not even crickets made a sound, and it felt like the air thickened around him with each step. He took deeper into the woods. He came across an abandoned campsite. Long cold ashes in a fire pit and a torn backpack lying beside a collapsed tent. The backpack still had supplies inside, but no sign of the person who brought them, and that made him uneasy. He lifted the tent flap and froze when he saw long scratches inside the fabric, like something had clawed its way out, not in. He turned off his flashlight for a moment to listen, and that's when he heard it, the faint sound of breathing, coming from somewhere behind him. He swung the flashlight around, but each time the beam moved, the breathing shifted as if something was circling him just outside the edge of the light. He called out, asking if anyone needed help, but the breathing turned into a low gurgling growl in response. He stumbled backward and nearly fell over a trail of footprints, human at first, but becoming distorted and misshapen the further they went. He followed the footprints against his better judgment, noticing how tree trunks became unnaturally twisted the deeper he walked. Branches snapped somewhere above him, and he looked up expecting to see an animal. But instead he saw something pale dart between the treetops. He tried to convince himself it was his imagination, but then he noticed that all the trees around him had fresh claw marks, as if something massive had passed through minutes earlier. He turned to leave, only to realize the trail he had walked had vanished entirely, replaced by a wall of unfamiliar trees. His phone had no signal, and even the compass app began spinning in circles as if refusing to show direction. He decided to walk toward the sound of running water, hoping it would lead him back to the main path. But the stream he found was black as ink and unnaturally still. Something beneath the surface shifted, sending ripples across the water even though no wind blew. He backed away, but as he did, a handprint appeared on the water's surface, perfectly shaped, pale and slowly rising upward. The hand emerged, then another, and then a face rose just enough to reveal glowing white eyes staring directly at him. He ran, branches tearing at his clothes, but every direction he turned looked exactly the same, as if the forest was rearranging itself around him. He slowed down only when he realized he could no longer hear his own footsteps, even though he was still running. It was as if the forest had stolen every sound around him, turning the world into a mute nightmare. He whispered for help, but even his own voice didn't echo. It just vanished into the cold air. Panicking, he turned his phone flashlight on, only to see dozens of fresh footprints suddenly surrounding him, none of them his. Some of the prints looked human. Others were distorted like elongated hands pressed into the ground. He tried to step out of the circle, but as soon as his foot crossed the edge, A deep growl vibrated through the earth beneath him. Something beneath the ground moved, crawling just under the surface like a massive burrowing creature. Suddenly the movement stopped, and the silence returned. But now he sensed someone standing behind him. He didn't turn around. He couldn't. He felt breath, cold and layered, crawl across the back of his neck. When he finally forced himself to turn, the figure vanished, leaving only the echo of footsteps retreating deeper into the forest. He followed the sound out of desperation until he arrived at a clearing filled with dozens of missing person posters nailed to the trees. Some of the faces were recent. Others looked decades old, their ink washed out by rain. He realized this was no legend. This place had taken people for years. Before he could escape, a low voice whispered his name directly into his ear. Though he was alone in the clearing, he bolted through the trees, branches cutting his arms as he ran blindly until he saw a faint, warm light ahead. He burst into a small cabin, collapsing on the floor as the warm lantern glow filled the room. He shut the door quickly, breathing hard, only to see deep scratches covering the inside of the wooden walls. A torn jacket hung on a hook, still wet with rain, suggesting someone had been there moments earlier. He reached for the lantern to secure it when he noticed a fresh, muddy footprint leading toward the back room. He followed the footprints, heart pounding, each step echoing far too loudly in the cramped wooden space. As he pushed the door open, a gust of cold air extinguished the lantern instantly, plunging him into darkness. In that darkness, something breathed inches from his face, slow, deliberate, and hungry. He swung the lantern wildly to create space, but the creature retreated with impossible speed, leaving only a scraping sound on the floorboards. He stumbled backward, reaching blindly for the door, but when he opened it, he was no longer in the cabin. The cabin had disappeared entirely, leaving him standing alone in the center of the forest clearing. A circle of glowing white eyes opened one by one around him. He tried to scream, but the forest stole his voice again, and the eyes closed in,